There are places on this earth where silence breathes louder than the wind, where even the sun, bold and ancient, dares not pierce the stone. Beneath the valleys of Cappadocia, deep within a honeycomb of rock and bone lies a tomb unlike any other. They arrived in Gogrim, a village carved from the mountains themselves. The locals, usually eager for coin, refused to approach the ruin. Frescoes lined the path like any Christian image he had seen, saints without faces, angels holding closed books. The Virgin veiled in stone, weeping blood from eyeless sockets. And then, after what Louvel recorded as 27 minutes of descending eternity, he found the door. One, an old woman with a necklace of baby teeth, spat at Louvel's feet and muttered, "The mountain remembers. But it never forgives." Hundreds of figures stood upright against the walls, each encased in what appeared to be soot-covered resin. Their skin, if it could still be called that, was leathery but intact. Their eyes were gone, their mouths open. All of them in the same frozen posture, arms raised, not in prayer, but in terror, as though trying to claw through centuries of stone, a tomb with no carvings, no names, no exits. Only rows of bodies, perfectly preserved. Their mouths agape in a scream that never had air to echo. He called it a marvel of early Christian martyrdom, and declared the site to be the final resting place of a heretical sect. But there were no symbols of martyrdom, no crosses, no chalices. The air felt damp with sorrow. Louvel's journal changed tone. His entries grew erratic. He wrote of hearing whispers in Latin, of a cold that gripped the soul, not the skin, and of eyes not his own, staring at him from behind the resin. The other hadn't spoken since the seal was broken, but Lovell possessed it now had stopped asking for consent. Began cutting into the mummified bodies, noting that they had no embalming, no linen, no resin. It was their own skin that hardened around them, sealing them in. As though in their final moments, their flesh calcified from the inside out. Only a single inscription above the highest alcove. Written in crude Greek, it was the winter of 1836, when French archaeologist Etienne Louvel, a man more obsessed with decay than discovery, received a letter sealed in wax and blood. A circular slab of basalt, 8 feet wide, covered in script older than Aramaic. Louvel, blinded by the opium of discovery, ordered his men to breach it with powder and fire. The translator protested, begged even, whispering, "This is not a tomb. This is a prison. No wounds, no struggle. Only the same unnatural preservation." The author, anonymous, spoke of a subterranean cathedral of the forgotten. Buried beneath the old monastery of St. Thalassios, structure long swallowed by volcanic ash and Ottoman silence, the letter warned, "They are not dead as you understand death." Louvel, divorced from reason and family alike, embarked within a fortnight. Dragging with him 3 Ottoman guides and a translator whose eyes twitched whenever Latin was mentioned, he descended anyway. The tunnel was not dug. It was carved with precision that defied any tool known to the 4th century. It was not a door, but a seal. But science does not kneel to fear. The explosion echoed like thunder through the womb of stone. And what followed was not silence. Inside, it was not a chamber. It was a sanctum round, vaulted and impossibly vast. One of the guides vomited. Another fled and never stopped running. Louvel, though shaken, was enraptured. They betrayed the light. Now they feed the dark. By the 3rd day, the stench had begun not of rot, but of memory. Then the translator disappeared. They found his body wedged between 2 mummified figures, his face twisted into the same expression as theirs, mouth open, eyes rolled back. Louvel ordered the body exhumed for study. The remaining guide refused. One had a tear still clinging to its cheek. Louvel wrote, "In a final moment of clarity, they did not die. They were denied death. This is not preservation. This is punishment. But why, and by whom?" It was on the 7th day that Louvel found the staircase, not carved into the stone like the rest, but grown twisting down like a petrified root, smooth and black and slick to the touch. It did not belong to any known architecture. It felt organic. Beneath it pulsed a cold draft, like the breath of something long buried, still exhaling. Smaller, rounder, its walls painted with what he first assumed to be frescoes. But closer inspection revealed they were not paintings. They were shadows burned into stone. Human figures, arms raised, some mid-screamed, like after-images from a fire that had never gone out. The remaining guide, a mute now broken by what he'd seen, simply pointed and turned away, refusing to descend. Louvel, alone but unrelenting, took a lantern and stepped downward. Each step gave off a hollow sound like bone under pressure. Robes clung to its frame like wet parchment, and its skull wore a crown made not of gold, but woven hair still black, still alive, pulsing faintly. The darkness below was not simply an absence of light, it was thick, almost tactile, pressing against the edges of the flame. A ceremony of silence. They sealed themselves alive, one by one, chanting hymns written backwards, until their voices turned to gasps, and their gasps to nothing. The last among them, the prior, whose corpse now sat before Louvel, was the watcher. It was repeated over and over in the margins. When the light dies, the eye opens. His task, remain awake, seated, unmoving, until the final light in the chamber died. The lantern flickered not, from lack of oil, but, as if the shadows were swallowing the flame, turned to leave. A monastic order from the 4th century, excommunicated for heresy, but theirs was no simple blasphemy. They believed salvation lay not in the light of God, but in the extinguishing of light entirely. That only by descending into absolute darkness could the soul be freed of the body's corruption. Their goal was apotheosis not through holiness, but through obliteration. Louvel's hands trembled as he opened it. The pages crackled like autumn leaves. He beat against it, screamed, clawed, but the darkness swallowed all sound. He wrote that the bodies in the upper chamber had begun, humming, that sometimes in moments between sleep and starvation, he saw their hands twitch. The only answer he received was the dry rustle of parchment behind him, as if the book had begun to turn its own pages. The script was in a variant of Cappadocian Greek, mixed with Latin, with whole sections scrawled over in red ink that reeked of copper and salt. Encourage the heresy to grow, to build, to ritualize. And on the night of the sinking, just as the final chant began, the keepers collapsed the passage and sealed the sanctuary. No martyrdom, no salvation, only a slow, suffocating end. The stair ended in a second chamber, and in the center, a dais. Upon it a throne, upon the throne a skeleton, not of a king, but of a monk. On its lap lay a book, bound in leather that looked too smooth to be animal, and stitched with thread to find to be silk. The book was a confession. It told the story of the Frotress Lucy's Ultimate, Brotherhood of the Last Light. They called it the Sinking, and they had nearly succeeded. They had a rival sect, Custodes Solista, keepers of the sun charged by the early church to eradicate the Frotress and bury their faith forever. According to the book, they constructed the underground sanctum as a final gesture to their faith. Then, and only then, would the eye open. Louvel could not tear his gaze from that phrase. He snapped the book shut, heart hammering. The air around him had changed, but the staircase was gone. Where it once had been was now a wall of seamless stone, as if the chamber had always been sealed. 3 days passed, that's what the journal claims. Though no food, no water, no light, still Louvel wrote, scratched his thoughts into the margins of the monk's confession, now more mad than methodical. And that he no longer believed they had sealed themselves in. He believed they had been sealed in by others. A punishment, not for worshipping darkness, but for inviting it. A page torn from the monk's book revealed a final truth hidden beneath a false cover. The Brotherhood had not been alone, and so they did. They lured them underground, but death never came. For whatever the Brotherhood had summoned or believed they had summoned answered, and it fed on their breath, on their fear, on their faith, and still feeds, if the journal is to be believed. Louvel's final entry ends mid-sentence. It is not the darkness that frightens me now, but the ink bleeds off the page. It was never seen again. When Etienne Louvel vanished, it did not stir the world. One less madman chasing ghosts in the cracks of history. His disappearance was noted in a single line of an Ottoman provincial report. Foreign scholar presumed lost in cave collapse. Amidst the chaos, a group of French and Greek engineers were dispatched to Cappadocia to map underground structures for potential use as military caches. Among them was Louvel, a geologist. Unknowingly, the nephew of the very man who'd once vanished beneath those same stones. No body recovered. The monastery above the site already in ruin was declared cursed and dismantled stone by stone. The villagers rejoiced, but they never celebrated. Not really. Fear, after all, does not vanish when its vessel is buried. But eventually the passage caved, with a sound not of stone breaking, but of breath being released. The first man to enter, engineer Petro Zacharias, emerged minutes later and collapsed. Not from fear or poison. For decades, the sanctum lay silent again, till 1921. The Great War had ended. The Ottoman Empire dissolved into dust and broken names. It was not a superstitious man. One figure had fallen face down, its fingers curled into the stone as though clawing in death. But the damage was done. Something had awakened. Not in the tomb, in him. He had fought in the trenches, had seen what real horror looked like, men coughing up mud, children scavenging bullets, rats feeding on the sleeping. Ancient, airless, the seal bore the faint remnants of a sigil burnt, as though once touched by divine fire. No name, no return address. He walked barefoot over ash that whispered in ancient Greek. He heard chants not sung, but breathed into his ears by things unseen, obsessed now, drawn not by curiosity, but by hunger. And behind it, sonar picked up something hollow. His stomach, according to the coroner, was full of a grayish ash, not unlike volcanic dust. How it had gotten there, no one could explain. Not a single match or fire had been lit in the home for months. Hundreds of them. Upright, unmoving, unrotted. But where Louvel the Elder had found them frozen in anguish, saw something far worse. Compared to that, dusty myths held little power. But blood remembers, even when memory does not. Inside, amid letters and broken maps, she found the journal, still stained, still unreadable, still pulsing faintly at the spine. It was during a routine survey that S-Team discovered an anomaly beneath a layer of basalt near Gugrim, a perfectly circular chamber. Sealed. And pinned to the first page, a single lock of black hair still pulsing faintly, like it had in the monk's crown. He ordered it opened. She was institutionalized a year later for persistent visual hallucinations. When asked what she saw, she would only say, "She said he whispered a single word when they carried him out." It took 3 days with drills and care, the rock refusing to yield. From laughter, he laughed until he choked on his own tongue. Shaken but resolute, descended himself. Inside, he found the same images his uncle had described in a forgotten, water-damaged journal left in the family attic, walls scorched with shadow, a sanctum of twisted theology and bodies. They had moved. Not drastically, but their posture was changed. Heads tilted. Arms were positioned. Overwhelmed with something he could not explain. Grief, perhaps, or ancestral fear called for an immediate closure of the site. He began dreaming. In his sleep, he saw corridors lined with mouths open, but silent. And always, always that phrase, "When the light dies, the eye opens." He awoke each time choking, unable to speak for hours. And then, a month after his return to Athens, he received a package. Inside, wrapped in a cloth stiff with age and salt, was the journal of Etienne Louvel, thought lost with him nearly a century ago. The journal's final entries were unreadable. The ink had bloomed outward into the pages like mold, but kept it. He stopped teaching, stopped speaking. By the time his wife found him seated in their wine cellar, motionless, eyes glassed, he had not blinked in days. Below, died 3 weeks later. Officially, stroke. Unofficially, starvation. His body was cremated, but the journal was never found. It is until 1987. A historian named Helen Markoulis, cataloging forgotten archives in Paris, stumbled upon a sealed crate labeled Noir, the Black Pilgrimage. But now, one page was legible again, written not in Etienne's hand, nor S, but hers. We did not bury them alive. We buried ourselves above their grave. Helen never finished her project. The eye watches. Through mouths. Then one day she sewed her lips shut. With her own hair. Time forgets what it cannot comprehend. And what it refuses to bury, it simply renames. The sanctum beneath Cappadocia. It still exists, is no longer marked on maps. The valley has since been declared a National Heritage Site. Officially, the purpose was to explore unknown branches of the daring Q underground city. Equipped with seismic gear, oxygen tanks, and equipment to measure radiation, magnetic fields, and geological instability. They descended through levels long sealed, reaching areas untouched since the Byzantines. And then, somewhere beyond level 7, their feed went dark. Unofficially, a satellite scan had picked up something disturbing. A pattern. Not natural, not architectural, but rhythmic. Pulsing, in intervals exactly 243 seconds apart. Tourists walk above it daily, snapping photographs of fairy chimneys and frescoed caves, never knowing that beneath their footsteps lies a shrine not to faith, but to a silence so complete it devours memory itself. But silence, like stone, remembers. And stone, like flesh, can fracture. In 2011, a new excavation was authorized by the Turkish Ministry of Culture. A team of 6 entered, 4 men, 2 women, for 243 seconds. But leaked footage, the kind that circulates only in corners of the internet that no sane man should linger, shows something else. In the final seconds, one frame reveals dozens of figures in the background. When connection resumed, only one member was visible on the live stream, a technician named Yilmaz. With a government cover-up, a sealed chamber, the eye closed again. But truth rarely ends so neatly. Children waking with ash in their mouths, farm animals refusing to enter caves, and most troubling, Shepard discovered a perfectly round hole, freshly revealed by an earthquake. At the bottom, a staircase, twisting downward, black and slick. We seated on the stone floor facing the camera. His lips were gone, not cut simply. Absent, like they had never existed, bloodless. A hole where words could never form. Behind him, just out of focus, the stone pulsed, not glowed, not flickered, but pulsed. Like a heartbeat behind centuries of rock. Wrote a single line on his palm with a trembling hand and held it to the lens. It's not a tomb. Then he walked out of frame. His body was never recovered. The others, too, vanished. Official reports cite gas exposure and psychological collapse. Upright, watching, and one with its hand pressed flat against the lens. A burned-in shadow, identical to the ones Etienne Louvel described nearly 2 centuries earlier. If this were fiction, the story might end here. Because in 2023, a small community in northern Anatolia reported strange phenomena. The villagers filled it with concrete. But a month later, the concrete cracked from below. And now here you are hearing this tale, wondering how much is real, how much is story, but you didn't exhale. Don't look closer. Ask yourself this. Why have so many cultures, across so many eras, feared the idea of being buried alive? Why do we seal the mouths of the dead with coins, with cloth, with stone? What are we really afraid they might say? Because maybe, just maybe, death is not silence. Maybe it's a conversation we were never meant to hear. And below us, beneath the caves and cathedrals, the bones and borders, we are not alone. We are above, and something beneath is listening, waiting for the light to die and for the eye to open. Thank you for wandering into the forgotten. If your breath fogs the mirror tonight, and if you must, never listen too long, because the mouths may still be open, and they no longer whisper.